have a short survey, so it's always great to get your feedback on this content as well as future Carnegie colleges that you'd like to see. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin and Judy. Thanks for coming.
Sure.
Thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. Thanks, Carnegie, for having us out today. And also just thanks for partnering with us where we have some mutual clients. We really appreciate all of the collaboration. So I'm Judy Salm, and as my colleague is Kevin Leonard. And today we're going to talk to you about family philanthropy and engaging your family in your philanthropy. And there's a packet of information for everyone, including these this PowerPoint is in there as well, if you're interested in following along. And before I take a deep dive, just very quickly about the Cleveland Foundation. I don't know how many people have heard of the Cleveland Foundation before, but we are our region's community foundation. We are actually the first one first one in the world. We were started in 1914, and today we have charitable assets of about $2 billion from many generous donors over the years. And each year we give away about $90 million within Cleveland and actually all over the U.S. And that's all driven by our donors. So you're probably familiar with our grant making team, where you might hear they've made a big grant for Public Square or for some sort of economic development or for education. A lot of the work that we do as well, what Kevin and I are doing is we work with donors who want some assistance with their giving. So they aren't necessarily giving to the Cleveland Foundation, but they're giving through us. So we have things like donor advised funds and alternatives to private foundations where we work with families and help them accomplish their charitable goals. So Kevin's role, he actually works with individuals to figure out what types of charitable vehicles work for them and what types of gifts make sense. And then once they come in the door with us, I will work with them and their families if they would like to help them become a little more strategic with their giving. So it's a lot of fun. As you know, families are all different and their dynamics are all very different. And so if you know one family foundation, you know one family foundation. I mean, that's the old saying, and it's very true. And along the way, we've just learned some tips and tricks to kind of help people who are interested in engaging their family and their philanthropy, and thought I would share some with you. So go ahead.
Judy, I think I never knew this, that until the donor advised thing came up. I always thought the Cleveland Foundation, if you were involved with them, you gave the money to them.
Right.
Usually in a when you die or something. I'm sure you get lifetime gifts as well.
Right.
And I thought that everything went wherever the Cleveland Foundation wanted it.
Right.
The whole notion of a donor advised fund where you can have a fund and choose it, and of course these forms. Are you going to talk about what do you call it, the donor form?
We are. We can touch, and just to touch on what Judy said, we average giving away $90 million a year. 50% of that is donor directed. So they go to, these dollars go to the organizations that the donors are passionate about. Roughly 30% is directed by our board. Our board has identified 6 areas of importance for the area that we need to step in and fund. Education, economic development, youth development, arts and culture. So, and then the 20% is responsive grant making. So the nonprofits in the area will submit a grant request to us. Our program team will evaluate it, and that's where that 20% of the.
Wasn't that quite different years ago? I always thought of it as that's what the Cleveland Foundation was with nonprofit response kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've had donor advised funds for. Does everyone know what a donor advised fund is? I mean, it won't be the focus of today, but it's like a charitable giving account, almost like a bank account, where You put the money in and you get your tax deduction from putting it in, and then the money's invested over time, and then you give it away to the charities of your choice. And they're very popular vehicles today. And but yeah, we've been offering them, I think, since about the mid-'80s, absolutely. And like many others, a lot of banks offer them, and brokerage firms, and it's one of the largest growing vehicles today. And so yes, exactly, it's great to point that out. And what Kevin and I do, a lot of donors that we see today, there are a fair amount of legacy gifts that still come into the Cleveland Foundation, as you said, and they go for the benefit of the community. And then a fair amount of the work that we do are working with individuals who want to give where they want. And so we'll work with them to help them figure out through their fund how they would like to do that and how to engage their family. So I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you.
So the donor advised fund, a lot of people might open an account at Charles Schwab, for example, a donor advised fund, and then it goes to a bunch of charities. You're saying that they can skip that and go directly to the Cleveland Foundation and then use the Cleveland Foundation as that?
They can open a donor advised fund with us, similar to a Schwab or a Fidelity. It would mechanically work the same way. They would make a recommendation to the Cleveland Foundation and say, I'd like to give X to my alma mater, I'd like to give Y to my church, Z to the Girl Scouts, and we would process that. And I think the difference is with working with the Cleveland Foundation, your client can pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm a little lost, I don't know where to give, or gee, I've heard about this organization, what can you tell me? We can do due diligence, Judy can work with the program team and help your client kind of figure out where their dollars are gonna go. I think with a Fidelity and a Schwab, they do a great job with kind of processing requests, but I'm not sure they can give you the insight to the local nonprofit in town here.
And can they give to any charity for you guys, or only ones that you guys have?
No, any approved 501c3.
Okay.
Yeah.
So IRS approved 501c3.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. No, those are great questions. I'm glad you asked. And we were going to cover those as well as, that's primarily the work that we do with families is primarily because we're working with those that have these types of funds. So that's exactly right. And we're going to cover those in a little more detail through this as well. So what I thought I would start with is just kind of give you a little bit of a primer of the work that we do with families and some of the tips that we've learned with how to engage your family in your philanthropy. We have a lot of people that will say they'll set this up for themselves. As they're thinking about the future, they would like their children to be involved in it. They would like their grandkids. And what are tips for communicating with them, navigating the family dynamics, getting people inspired and engaged to be involved in the great work that you've done and that you'd like to pass along to them. So yeah, I thought I would talk about some of those tips today. And I'm using this cool thing for the very first time today, so I hope I do this properly. And this is a handout as well in your packet that I have there. So I think you probably know as successful individuals why family philanthropy is important. You probably have talked to your advisors about strategies to help preserve your wealth throughout multiple generations. There's always this discussion of avoiding the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves situation where the third generation maybe loses the wealth of the first generation. And what a lot of studies have shown that look at successful families that hold on to their wealth, having family philanthropy as a practice is actually a best practice for helping you hold on to your wealth. And one of the reasons is because like any sort of family cohesiveness, it helps create a larger family narrative, and it helps you as a family collectively instill some missions, your values, and your accountability. So working together as a family is a great practice to get them to think about other things related to your wealth and involvement. So throughout the years, we have worked with many different families with many different dynamics. And there are three key things I have found working with people that successfully are able to engage their family in their philanthropy. So a lot of times we would be talking to probably the grandparent generation. A lot of people that come in the door through us are their grandparents. We sometimes start with parents who are maybe 40s, 50s, but a lot of times we're working with grandparents who are trying to get their 40, 50-year-old kids involved and then possibly their grandkids. And so the dynamics are all a little bit different, but I have found that some 3 key elements to getting this to work is, first of all, to reflect on like, what do you want from this? What are your goals? What's your story? What are your experiences that drive your want to give and be involved? Second, to learn how to communicate, and that's definitely an easier said than done practice. We all know that, but there's, a few lessons we've learned along the way. And then finally, invite your family. Find a way to have that discussion. Don't assume that they know what you're doing and want to be involved. Somehow have that discussion with them and bring them into the mix here. So we're going to go through a couple of these things today and see if any of these tips will help you with your family. So how many of you are thinking about this? Like, thinking about, how many of you have your family involved in your philanthropy, first of all? Or you're giving it, whether it's volunteering, giving your dollars in any way, shape, or form. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah, so good. So you'll be a little bit familiar with some of this. So the first thing, as far as reflecting, and every donor is different, but we will tend to, when someone comes to me and they say, I want to actually start getting my family involved and I want to share what I want them to do, how should I do this? We start with asking them to reflect a little bit, and they may or may not do some or all of this, but there's some really good questions to ask yourself before you think about asking your family to be involved with you. So we talk about what their story is, so what things happened in your life that influences your want to give back. What are your goals? So what are your goals, first of all, for your family and your philanthropy? What are some of your values that you'd like to share with your family through your philanthropy? So it's kind of a fun exercise to walk through with different people. The first thing we do talk about, if there's anything you do to get your family involved, of all the tips I tell you today, the one thing I have learned is that really telling your story is probably the key thing that drives people to want to be involved in what you do. It's better than just kind of giving instructions. You could say to your family, I like giving to education, and I like giving to the food bank, and I really hope you would like to continue to do that. But to really inspire your family, I have found is that telling your story, what experiences in your life have impacted you, whether that's in your personal life, your professional life, and also in your giving life, that seems to really have an impact on your family. And not to get too much into theory, but there is a noted psychologist, Marshall Duke, and he studies child psychology, and he did this study that says that of many different kids in different situations, that says that knowing basic things, kids knowing basic things about their parents' story, and he actually outlined 20 key things they should know, is one of the most successful things for families being emotionally healthy and cohesive as a unit. And the reason being that his belief is that along those same lines, it creates this larger family narrative where if your kids understand that they're part of a bigger picture, and if your story, most of our stories reflect some good things and some bad things, and if you're able to share that with a younger generation, that it helps them with their own well-being, where they understand that ups and downs are part of life, and it's happened to all of these other people and influences in their life, and they're okay. So I know it's a little bit theoretical, but it's very interesting.
And just to add on to that, I know of one situation where the grandfather was very successful, but it took him a long time to get there. And when the grandkids come along, especially the younger generation, they just see their grandfather and grandmother, oh, they've had this successful business or this successful life. And they actually sat down with them and said, I'm a World War II vet. I got out of the service, and I struggled, but to tell that story, they were very appreciative to know that it just didn't happen. There's a life story there of struggles and setbacks and successes, and actually the grandchildren were very appreciative to learn that. And Grandma and Grandpa weren't just born successful. Right. It took a lifetime of work.
Yes.
And just to tell them that story was very good.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's a very interesting article about this study that I put in your packet. It's from the New York Times. This writer, Bruce Feiler, he talks a lot about families and he writes a lot about them. And it's a really interesting story about this study and what it means to families. So, so that's a little bit of the theoretical. And actually, I put this in your packet as well. So I put her in the picture because she reminds me of my Italian grandmother. But so he outlines 20 basic questions that he thinks every child should know about their parents and possibly their grandparents. And they're very basic. Do you know how your parents met? Do you know where your mother grew up? Do you know some of the lessons that your parents learned from good or bad experiences? And so once this study came out, people were clamoring to know, what are these 20 questions? I absolutely need to know these and make sure that my kids know this. And one of the things that he wanted to communicate about this is that the process of communicating is far more important than the actual facts themselves. The fact that you're sitting down with someone and you're transferring information to them that they wouldn't know otherwise is a really key piece of this. So one of his very last questions is, whoops, I have to get used to not doing this screen here. Oh, that's all right. No, that's okay. I'm moving along. But one of his last questions is, do you know of a family member whose face froze because they always had it in a grumpy position, just to be funny? And he said a number of people answered yes. And, again, the reasoning that the actual fact doesn't matter. It's just the process of telling the story and your family understanding it that actually matters. So, no, this is fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Oops.
Oh, that's all right. Okay, so now it's went
go.
exactly where it needs to go,
Okay.
like Wheel of Fortune. But
Yeah.
So part of your personal story is something you want to reflect on, and you want to reflect on what are some of those key things that drive who I am today, the good things and the bad things, the things that have influenced my success, the things that have maybe been failures, the things that make me want to give. And so when we sit with donors, we ask them a little bit about their personal experiences, and then we ask them some questions about their philanthropic giving. So how did you learn about giving? Who were the individuals that influenced your giving? What's the most satisfying gift you've given today? And it just helps you think about what you want to communicate to your kids. And I find that not everyone wants to go through these or wants to answer all of these, but we present them to people, and based on their situation, they kind of pick out what they're interested in, and it helps tell a story to their kids when they're getting ready to talk to them about their philanthropy. So let me go to the next here. The other thing we will ask someone before they really get their family involved in their philanthropy is, what are your goals? And one of the key goals would be, why exactly do you want your family involved? And it can be a variety of things here. It could be just to bring them closer together, to pass on my values to the next generation, to establish a family legacy. It could be anything, and we make this open-ended, but we'll give them some ideas here. Think about which family members do you want to be involved. It's very different for some people. It's just their immediate kids. For others, it's their kids and their spouses. For others, they absolutely want their grandkids. And it's good to have a sense of that before you really want to go out and invite them to join you in your philanthropy. And then we do ask them this, and this is something we'll talk a little bit about today, but how important are certain things related to your giving? Do you care if your kids, do you want them to give to the same organizations that you have traditionally cared about? Do you want them to give at least in the same interest areas? Maybe it's education, maybe it's economic development. It's good to have some sense of what you hope to get from your family as you're kind of having this larger discussion about getting them involved. So. And then we will walk through part of your story and your goals is also just kind of knowing what your values are. We have this little worksheet we'll do with people. Most people know off the top of their head what their values are, so a lot of people don't need to go through this. Sometimes it just gives you some words to think about so you can quickly pick them out. But and a lot of times this works well with a family. At some point, if you're getting your whole family together and you're going to be doing some giving together, collectively asking each person what their top values are very helpful so that you can figure out where you have common values and where you can find common ground with your giving. And then we'll ask them to think a little bit about your interest areas. And, you know, again, do you want your kids or your grandkids to give in the same area that you are? Which do you care about? Most people know right off the top of their head what they care about. And then they can narrow it down to, you know, if it's health, they know, you know, I support breast cancer research or something to that effect. But when we do these types of things, it's also a good exercise to do as a family. So we would, again, have the family members look through and identify their top interest areas, and then we figure out where they have some collective interests so that we can come up with some cohesiveness and help them with a giving plan. So after we go through all these different reflections, concepts to think about, we can also give them tips on how exactly do you communicate to your family now all of these things. You have a story now, you know what your values are, you know what you've supported, you've thought a little bit about what you want from them. How exactly do you communicate with them? And so here's a few of the things that we have found are very helpful with the communication piece. So, you know, the obvious is that it's best to communicate early and often. You know, so the earlier you can start talking to your kids or your grandkids about, at the very least, even telling them the organizations that you're involved in, then it becomes something that's ingrained in them, and they're used to, by the time you're asking them to formally be involved, they've heard this before. They're not surprised, and maybe that story you've told them about yourself and your success has actually inspired them to want to be involved. So it's a nice thing. As I mentioned, I always think the number one thing is just tell your story. If you don't pass along your values or your interest areas, I do think that people really connect to stories. It doesn't just inform them about what you want them to do, it actually inspires them. When they learn, your grandkids, they want to know what your ups and downs have been. They're interested in that, and so it's a great way to get them inspired and thinking about helping you with your charitable giving eventually. So if you are going to talk to your family officially about charitable giving, maybe you've established some sort of donor advised fund or family foundation and you want to get them involved, I always say consider your family's dynamics and traditions when you decide to talk to them. So a lot of families I talk to will do something like this at a family gathering. So maybe it's at the holidays, maybe it's when they have an annual vacation. Kevin says his best conversations with his dad are on the golf course. They have the deepest ones there. So, you know, wherever works for you. One of the lessons I've learned, though, especially if you have a larger family, if you want to get them all, if you want to make an ask for them to all be personally involved in your giving, a lot of times it's better to have that as a one-on-one conversation because you're not putting them on the spot and you can listen to whatever apprehensions they might have. They might say they're not busy enough, they don't have the inclination. You know, it might be best to kind of do that one-on-one versus, you know, announcing it to the family and saying, we expect you all to do this. So, and then consider telling your story and your wishes in writing or an audio or a video. And we do this with a few families. So, and then finally, if you are going to do this formal thing with your family, sometimes it is nice to have an outside person who helps you with it. And that's what we do at the foundation. We're sort of the outside facilitator. When someone says, I'm going to set up a donor advised fund, I want to get my kids and my grandkids involved, how do I do that? We are sort of the voice who can remain neutral and help people make decisions collective decisions on how to do this. So
And they do a nice job. They set an agenda, they have a docket, they have some structure to the meeting, so everybody's on the same page.
yeah, absolutely. Good point. So, all right. So let's see here. Some of these interesting ways to tell your story. Has anyone heard of StoryCorps? It's a website. NPR will tell stories from StoryCorps. Well, it's a website that has like 60,000 audio recordings of individuals interviewing each other. And the way it originated was out of a booth in a Grand Central Station. A nonprofit set up this booth where two people who know each other could go in and they could interview each other, and they would take a photo and then they would upload it to the StoryCorps website. And so it's a very popular thing now. NPR tells a story, I think once a week. They'll find an interesting one, and it's actually available as an app on your iPhone now, where you can actually record an interview with someone, snap a photo, and upload it right to their website. And so I have an example here that I wanted to show you. of a very good one where I was searching. It's funny, this is actually a local private foundation, Shar and Chuck Fowler Family Foundation. I actually don't know them. I just did a Google Family Foundation StoryCorps, and their story popped up, and it's an excellent one because their daughters had interviewed them and asked them questions about their philanthropy and what their earliest memories are. And they said some really interesting things about it that I think are very helpful when you're telling your story. So I'm just going to play about 30 seconds of this clip. But they asked their mother about what one of her earliest influences was in philanthropy, and let's see if we can hear it well.
52, so I had never heard of the word philanthropy, but my mother was a very generous soul and heart, and she would often give food or things like that to help families. And there was a girl in my class that came from a very poor family, and I remember a lot of kids making fun of Bertha, and my mother sat me down and talked to me about that and said, you know, Bertha did not have much at home at all. So then she fixed up a nice picnic basket, and we went to visit Bertha's home and family, and that was a real shocker to me to see what little some people have.
So that's a great story that she shared about her earliest memory of philanthropy, and that a lot of it's driven by her mother's generosity. That was the first impression she had, and it's something that stayed with her and influences what she does today. And so it's just that concept that telling really nice stories are a way to engage your family in doing things like that. So even if you don't want to do the StoryCorps, I've had my family do it, and I think it's fun. Like the younger kids that are teenagers, they're going to ask questions like, you know, the silly questions. Grandma, what's the worst thing you've ever done? You know, ha ha ha. They want her to tell things like that. But, you know, I find like my 20-something-year-old nieces and nephews, they ask far more insightful questions of their grandmother. She's very different than them. You know, my mother did not go to college, and my brothers and sisters are first generation and successful. And so our kids and grandkids all have the benefit of things that are very different than my mother, and they're fascinated by her and her stories, and they learn a lot from her. I think that the value, she's a very generous person. She gives away money that she doesn't have to give, but I think they learn those things from her, and they're fascinated by it. And so I would encourage you as grandparents to tell your kids your story, or your grandkids your story. It is interesting to them. It really helps them want to continue doing all the good work that you do. So that's StoryCorps, and you can do it on your phone too. If you use, you know, my mom still has a flip phone, so I don't think she could do it. But if you have a mobile phone, there is an audio recording thing there. You could still do the interviews with each other. So, and I would encourage that you you think of the questions ahead of time a little bit if you want some really interesting answers versus putting someone on the spot. So, works out well. This other nice little tool here is a book called the Grandparent Legacy Project, and I'm going to pass it around for you. I've given this to a lot of donors who are grandparents, and actually I'm going to leave these 2 copies here for whoever would like them. But it's a nicely formatted book that tells a lot of stories of different philanthropists that are grandparents, and some of them are very famous ones, and others just came into wealth in different ways. One of the couples in here actually won the lottery, and so these people, they tell their story, and they tell about how it influences their giving, and it has an audio recording of all them as well. And then as a grandparent, what you do at the very end, you get the opportunity after reflecting on these stories to tell your own story. So they prompt you with different questions in here, and they have a space in here. All of these stories have a nice little photo attached to them. Let me see if I can find one here. They'll always have a nice little photo and then a nice little story. And then at the very back, they give you a place to put your own photo and tell your own story. And it's something you can work through with your grandkids, or you can even just do it yourself and give it to them. And I do think I have given this to a number of donors that have used this, and they absolutely love it. It's just a great tool to really share. It just gives you a vehicle to tell your story, which might be awkward in some other way. So I'm going to pass that around, and if anyone would like to have these, they're welcome to have them. So, and they're available on this website that I have in your packet here, 2164.net. We've done a lot of work with them. They actually train people in becoming facilitators. So I've gone to their trainings. A lot of wealth managers attend their trainings as well, because they kind of teach people about how to work with family dynamics and family means. So. Any questions so far? I'm going to keep moving through here so that we don't take up too much time. So at the as we get very formal with families, and not everyone wants to do this, but some of them do, we take pieces of that reflection that we've done with them and that storytelling, and sometimes we will just have them write it down and put it together. So they can sometimes share it at a family meeting. There are times that there are family members that actually don't want to communicate this to their kids, but they want it to be available after they're no longer with us and they've passed along their legacy, maybe through the foundation or some other way. They want their kids to know why they did some sort of charitable giving. And so it's a great tool to use. We walk a lot of families through this, but there's different elements in here: telling your story, implementing your values, telling them your family goals. You can kind of put it all together in a document that's very helpful for people. And I have found that it can be a very successful tool to have. And sometimes it's for families that do work together now as a family giving. And it's just a reminder. They might review this periodically to remind themselves what they decided they wanted to do. So. And then finally, the process of, to really get your family engaged in your philanthropy, I think you actually have to invite them some sort of other. So I have a lot of conversations with donors who have these donor advised funds. They have their kids named as advisors in the future. So their kids aren't doing anything with them now, but at some point when they're no longer able to do this, this parent passes it along to their children. And I always say to them, well, are you talking to them about this fund? Are you letting them know what you're doing with this? And a lot of times they'll say, I'm not sure, I don't want to, push them into anything. They already know what we do. They know that we go to this charity. They know, that we're involved in this. We assume they'll know what we want when we pass along. And I find, though, a lot of times after families do pass, and I hear from their kids, and we let them know that they were set up to, carry on the legacy of this fund, a lot of times they don't have a lot of details, and they aren't quite as inspired to do it. So I think it's a great idea in some way to make sure that you're inviting your family to actually do it and having that discussion, whether it's through a storybook or an audio recording or a facilitator of some sort. I think you want to make sure you do specifically ask them if you want to ensure that they're carrying it on. So. And just a few of the ways we look at it. One would be include them today. One very important thing is to understand the generational differences. How are grandkids different than we are? And then, as we said earlier, consider a formal route. Maybe you do have a donor advised fund or some other thing like that. So include them today has just some of the obvious, starting early. The earlier you can get your grandkids involved in what you're doing, the better they will know and not be surprised when you ask them to be involved. So some ways to do that is, again, share your story. I like the concept of introducing them to nonprofits where you're involved. So maybe if you go to a volunteer day and you can bring them with you, or if you go to an event that they have and you can bring them there, I find that's a nice way for them to actually see personally what you're doing. We have different events through the Cleveland Foundation that are, some are networking and some are educational, where we'll teach them about topics in the community. And I really like it when parents bring their kids or grandparents. They tend to be either teenagers or in their 20s, but I think it just has a nice impact on them when they're actually there seeing the work that you're doing. So when they're younger, teaching them to give on their own, having them give a portion of their allowance. We do have a number of families that have these funds set up, and they will have their grandkids give a portion of their birthday money to their donor advised fund or their bar mitzvah money. So it's just a nice way to teach them. And one of the things is when you have kids like raising money from their birthday party or their whatever it is, it's nice to actually be able to have them go to the charity and deliver that money themselves, or those toys or whatever it is. It really impacts them more when they see it personally. So, and then as we've talked about, getting your family involved might be as simple as right now starting to volunteer with them, share those family stories, and as we said, use an annual family get-together to talk about it. So one of the donors I work with, she's a grandmother, And what she does is through her fund, she gives, I don't know how many grandkids, she has about 10 of them. She gives them a pot of $500 each to give away each year. And what she asks them to do, they have an annual family vacation. She asks every one of them to come with a photo of them involved in the charity of some sort. Either they're there at the charity volunteering, or they're dropping off a gift, or they're taking a photo somewhere there. And she creates actually a scrapbook that's full of their different photos. And so it's creating this family story around her family giving. And I just think that's a very creative way. You don't have to have a donor advised fund to do that. You know, you're just asking your kids and grandkids to share what they're actually doing in their work. So it's kind of fun. And then understanding the differences in generations is a very big piece. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin here.
So I think when we go into these conversations, sometimes we tend to focus on ourselves, but it's good to recognize the generational differences and the experiences that have shaped the different generations. So right now, we're dealing with about 4 major generations out there. We've got the traditionalists who were born between 1925 and 1945. And just think about the events that shaped their lives: the Depression, segregation, the Holocaust, World War I and II, the New Deal, the GI Bill, the onset of movies. I mean, that was a big thing. It was go to the theater and see a movie. And what we find with this cohort is that their values are, unquestioned patriotism, loyalty, and selflessness. They still, no matter how much money they have, it's a waste not, want not attitude. They're not going to waste anything. They save for a rainy day. They have faith in the community and institutions. They don't question those. So they give to their church, or they give to the university, and it's usually unrestricted. What we're finding with this group is that they make up about 26% of the total U.S. giving. As I said, and I don't think they take a deep dive. They give to the unrestricted dollars and trust that the institutions will do the best thing with those dollars. And they support their traditional church and social service programs, education, and the arts. And you'll see a lot of this group giving to the veterans organizations. So it's just kind of knowing that perspective, that generation, and it's good for the younger generations to see this.
Let's see if that works. There we go.
And now our largest cohort is the baby boomers. So this group was born between 46 and 64, and they saw amazing changes. They were lucky enough to kind of be coming up through the post-war boom economy. They saw us land on the moon. They saw segregation go away with the Brown versus Board of Education decision. But they also grew up in the time of Vietnam and some pretty bad things that happened to our country with the assassinations of JFK and MLK. But they have different values. They are optimistic, given the booming post-war economy that they grew up in, but they also question traditional values. They weren't afraid to challenge the status quo. They were very work-centric. They were driven by perks and position and prestige, and that is translated into their philanthropy. They are the largest givers, the largest cohort of givers in the U.S. They don't give unquestionably just to institutions. They like to direct their dollars and for specific uses. They likely support the social causes that were important to them. They still support the troops. And they're not necessarily giving unrestricted dollars away to those institutions. They're a little bit more thoughtful about their philanthropy, and it's a little bit closer to their heart than the prior generation. And then we have Generation X here, born between 1965 and 1980. They grew up in a time where, things weren't as positive. We experienced Watergate, downsizing, the divorce rate of this generation were latchkey kids. They had to be self-reliant and raise themselves. They got to college and saw the Challenger explosion. So it was a less positive time than the baby boomer generation grew up in, and as a result, they're a little more skeptical. They're skeptical of the government, they're skeptical of marriage, they're skeptical of Wall Street. They're very independent and resourceful. They tend to focus on the bottom line. There's, as a result, there's less focus on work, and there was an increased focus on, family time. And as a result, this cohort, it represents 20% of our giving. They have a strong sense of independence and skepticism towards institutions, so they're more likely to find particular causes that are important to them, and they look for impact. They want to know how their dollars are actually translating and impacting a community. And lastly, we were dealing with the millennial generation. Again, they grew up in a little different time. They grew up in a time where they saw Oklahoma City, Columbine, September 11th, Hurricane Katrina, a lot of disasters. One of the biggest influences on this generation is the Great Recession that began in 07, 08. As a result, it's translated into how they work. They are very risk averse. Job security is extremely important to this generation. Some have put life on hold. They're in their 30s, they're not yet married, they haven't bought their first house. So again, this translates to their views on philanthropy. They represent about 10% of the total giving. They value diversity, sustainability, and inclusivity. Those are important themes that they were exposed to. They also look for demonstrated impact on organizations. This generation is a big user of technology. They give online, much more than we do. So, and they're not as focused on the local community. They're globally focused. They will give dollars overseas, microloans, that kind of thing. So, and they're also influenced by their peers more than any other group. I think they're so connected on their phones and in their peer groups. It's, what do you know about this organization? Are you giving to that organization? So, the key to thinking about all these generations when you sit down with your family is that you recognize that each generation has different life experiences, and you want to respect those and recognize those when you sit down at the table and have the conversation about philanthropy. Because their views, your kids' views and your grandkids' views, more likely than not, will not be your views, but you've tried to find some commonality. And this is kind of a summary chart that shows kind of the major areas that people give to. And the interesting thing is, no matter what the generation, they all seem to, give a certain percent to these very common areas. So not one generation is ignoring a cause over another, but you'll see some generations more focused on it than others. Just to highlight one, place of worship or church, you'll see that 46% of the mature generation gives, whereas the younger generation, Generation Y, only 22% gives to their local church. So it just kind of puts into perspective the different causes and how each generation chooses to give their dollars. Just some, to kind of follow on what Judy's been talking about. When you sit down with your family, you'll look for commonality where they may not exist. An example of this might be, you might be focused on giving to education, and that might be your alma mater, whereas your granddaughter or grandson is interested in supporting education, but they want to see the lives of folks in third world countries affected. So they might direct their dollars to help them just get a basic education. It's a commonality. It's education, but it's in different locales. You want to understand what shapes their approach to decision making. Again, going back to their life experiences. As difficult as this may be, you have to actually allow them to make decisions. Invite them to the adult table. I think everybody would be surprised pleasantly at how well they do. I think learning we have to acknowledge learning is a two-way street. We can learn from the Generation Y, and the generation of millennials can learn from the traditionalists. And lastly, just recognize other factors that might influence engagement. A lot of that is just timing. It's, grandparents are, fully retired and they can focus on philanthropy. Maybe their kids they're raising small kids and they're running from here to there and they just don't have time. And it's not that they don't want to, it just might be a discussion for another day.
Yeah, and I work with a few families that wanted their kids involved starting in their 30s, and one in particular, it was a family foundation, it was a formal one, and the kids at the time were not, the father wanted them to focus on basic needs, and at the time the kids weren't super engaged. We did outreach with the kids, we wanted to get them involved to start learning about nonprofits, to start meeting and doing things, and they said that they don't have time, they have young kids, they're busy with their jobs, they didn't have a lot. So we kept it really easy in the beginning. So knowing that they cared about basic needs, we just said, well, what about the food bank? What about the free clinic? We made it really easy, so once a year they were making decisions. And then over time, we would meet once a year and we would start to narrow it down a little more and start to understand what drives the kids' decision making. And what I found is that the son, his version of basic needs that he cares about is making food accessible nutritious food accessible to younger generations and seniors. So he really liked the concept of the urban gardens that were being, a lot of nonprofits are building urban gardens in areas of sprawl in the city itself. And he really liked that concept and started supporting those. And then his sister, she was a young mother, and she narrowed down her version of basic needs to young mothers. There's a lot of programs that help young mothers keep their children healthy, prevent infant mortality. She cared a lot about that. And once they started finding something that they liked, it's been, now about 8 years that I've been there and working with them. I feel like their lives are busier now. They actually are both running companies, they have more kids, but they're more engaged in it. So it's taken time, but they spend the time now on it. So it started off slow, we kept it real easy. And then as time came on, they're becoming more engaged, and now they have the time. So, it's still not every day, but it's a lot more frequently, and they love the work because they're able to do what they like, and they still respect their father's wishes of, he still likes the big umbrella organizations, the food bank and those others. So they make sure they're supporting a portion of that, and then they do some of their own projects that they love, and it keeps everyone happy and engaged. So, it's good to be patient and, let the dynamics work themselves through, so.
And this kind of just dovetails on our earlier discussion. This is some of the more formalized vehicles that we had, as we talked about earlier. There's donor advised funds, which is really like a charitable checking account. You make a gift to the foundation, and you would serve as the advisor, or you can have family members be co-advisors or successor advisors. And you can make a gift in any given year to a approved IRS 501c3, or not. You can sit back and wait a year. There's no obligation to make a gift in any given year, which is different from the formal rules of a private family foundation, where the IRS makes you distribute 5% of the net assets each year. So the money can stay in the account. It can invest it with a fine firm like Carnegie here, and then once the advisors and the family's ready to distribute, they can make that suggestion. A little more formal type vehicle we have is, it's a supporting organization. Let me go back. Let's see.
Try that other way. There you go.
Yep. It's akin to a private foundation without the hassle. It's got its own 509 status. Think of it as bolted on to a community foundation. So we have about 10 supporting organizations right now where you have your own 509 status. You work with the foundation staff to develop governance, a family mission. We run the meetings. We do the back office. We do really all the administrative work that makes the family, or allows the family just really to focus on their philanthropy. And then we have what's called is a designated fund. That's a fund that is set up to support particular charities or fields of interest in perpetuity. So a family might set up the designated fund and decide ahead of time, I want to support these 4 or 5 charities, or these 4 or 5 areas of interest, or 1 or 2, whatever they want. They put the money in, and then the Cleveland Foundation will make an annual distribution to those areas of interest over time.
Right. And that's a great vehicle if your kids don't really want to be involved in your giving, but you still want to support the charities that you've done throughout your life. A fund like this would allow you to continue to give forever. So your kids don't have to be involved in it. It just allows us, we'll set up, they're set up like endowment funds. It pays to the benefit of that organization every year on your behalf. They'll know it's coming from your fund, you know, it'll have all that information. So it's a way to continue giving forever if your kids don't necessarily want to be involved in all the good work that you've done.
And it's subject to a spending policy. So currently, right now, it's about 5%.
Yeah, exactly.
Could you expand on those a little?
Sure.
Sure.
So,
First question on the last one, the designated fund, what if you have a charity you're doing and for whatever reason they close?
Mhm.
Is there still a family member that's like a trustee of that fund, or does the Cleveland Foundation have to do that?
It's the Cleveland Foundation, but up front, you can put in the document, in the alternative.
Well, yeah, but
If this,
You're never gonna know.
we have well, there's two ways to handle that. You could say, if this organization should somehow close or lose its 501c3 status, I'd like the dollars to be directed to an organization that does a similar type mission.
Okay,
Or
so generality as opposed to another specific alternative.
correct. Or you can say,
First it goes to there and then
Yeah.
it becomes generalized.
then usually our language in it will go over to the Cleveland Foundation's discretion, and I think we have language in there to be used to a similar type organization. We want to honor donor intent as closely as possible.
I've only had, since I've been there, I've had like 1 or 2. The one I recall, there was like a youth center in Cleveland Heights, and I don't remember the name of it. A woman had started it, and there was a fund paying to it forever, and that went out of business. And so what they ended up doing is the foundation thought that the Boys and Girls Club nearby was a good alternative, and so they now are paying to the benefit of Boys and Girls Club in that area to do it. So yes, they try to make it as close as possible to honor someone's intention. So.
And secondly, could you describe a little bit more the difference between those first 2 options? They seem
Sure. So,
pretty similar.
first of all, dollar amounts to open them. So this is a minimum of $10,000, and it's less formal. So if in 1 year you would like to make a donation, you contact the foundation and say, I'd like to make a donation out of my donor advised fund. You could sit back and do nothing. Here, right now, our minimum to open these are $5 million, and these are much more structured and formal. A lot of them will entertain grant requests by certain organizations. We go through a grant review process. So this is closer to a family private foundation. But the Cleveland Foundation staff takes it upon themselves to do the meetings, the structure, to kind of make it a very robust foundation.
Right. And I should point out, as we were saying, we do this work with families, right, to help them, come up with a charitable giving plan and involve their families. We would do it with any of these. So whether you did the smaller donor advised fund or the large supporting organization, that's just part of the work that we do. So you don't need to have $5 million for me to sit with you and help you create a family plan. We would do it for all of them. This one really is, though, you really want a private foundation and you don't want to do all of the work yourself, because we would take on the entire process as opposed to having to hire someone to do your taxes and do the investment and do all of that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, one or both of these allows the donors to more or less be anonymous. In other words, they won't be
That's up to the donor.
bombarded with requests for grants and stuff.
Yeah, for example, in our donor advised donor advised fund agreement, you can check a box to say, I'd like to remain anonymous or not, so it leaves it up to you. That kind of puts the Cleveland Foundation as the buffer between you and
Right.
all the phone calls.
Yeah.
Right.
What about the other one?
This one is public, yes, it's
Okay,
not,
because you have an ID.
exactly, so
Right.
there's their tax form will go
Yeah.
online and someone can see
So-
what you give to, yes, exactly. So yes, this is a perfect tool for that, so, and I mean, 90-something% of people
Right.
set these up, and regardless of the size, you could still be formal in your approach to your family. You know, you don't have to have,
Right.
you know, you don't have to have this, so I always mention to people, it's, you know, that seems like a big disparity, 10,000, 5 million, you know, it's not
Well,
really that much.
The average size right now is
Yeah.
about 400,000.
Yeah.
And I think we have 500 of them,
Yeah,
something like, we
yeah,
have
it's
a number
big-
of, so,
yeah.
yeah.
You know, what's a tax efficient way to fund any of these? If most of your money is already in an IRA type account, and so there's a limit of $100,000 away to give away tax.
Right,
Without-
well, there's a,
Tax-free, but if you have intention of giving away significantly more money, other than giving it from a non-qualified account,
Mhm.
you're gonna pay standard income tax rates on it.
Right,
Is
there's, you know, certainly everybody's situation is different, but, you know, depending on what your tax situation is, you know, you can give away, you know, cash up to 50% of AGI, securities, you know, appreciated stock is one way to get that out of your estate and get, get the capital gain out and also get the charitable deduction. Larger,
That's in a non-IRA type of.
that's a non,
And then that's easy,
right,
but it's when you have the funds in an IRA and the limit at the present.
Is
time
$100,000.
$100,000.
Correct.
And you wanna give more than that, then you'd be paying income tax on whatever your current rate of income tax is, you'd be paying that, so that would be a loss.
Right.
For the charity.
well, you can do a direct rollover of 100,000. So that would never come into income.
Yeah, the
Right.
$100,000 is easy.
Right, so, I mean, there's numerous ways, I mean, you can set up charitable remainder trusts, you can do lead trusts, those are larger dollar, you know, bigger tax effect items, but it's a matter of kind of sitting down and figuring out, you know, what your specific, you know, I don't know how much of your
You're-
lifetime exemption you've
I think
used.
his question is, if a lot of people have an awful lot of their net worth in,
Retirement
rollovers
plans.
from
Mhm.
retirement plans
Sure.
or IRAs, whatever.
Sure,
Is there a way, of,
Before dying.
I mean, if you took the money out, you'd have that much charitable income.
right,
And
then
if you made that much of a donation.
It's a
one for
wash.
one, it would be a wash, is
Right,
that correct?
that is correct.
Okay, so that would be efficient in effect.
Well, you can
You
but
take out-
you can do a direct rollover of 100,000 where you don't ever take that into
No,
income.
I understand that.
But that allows you to make other charitable contributions, yeah, because you're
Yeah,
not,
that isn't,
Right.
that isn't in effect or whatever.
Right.
But let's go back through this again, just to make sure that I'm understanding it correctly. If you took the money out of your IRA as part of your RMD,
RMD,
additional,
right,
whatever.
right,
And then you make a contribution, that is a wash.
that is right, up,
So you've taken regular income dollars and gotten them out.
right,
With no tax effect, I think.
No.
Well-
They can't exceed
No,
50% of your.
That's not right.
Right,
With
well-
up to the $100,000, you can give that.
directly,
Directly.
without taking that in income.
Right, and anything else that you take out is taxed at your current income.
That's correct.
Right,
Right,
rate.
yes.
And then you can get a charitable deduction,
Uh,
which is less than what it's not a wash, it's not
Well,
100%.
you've given yourself more capacity to give if you do a direct rollover. Because if you do a direct rollover from your IRA to a charity, it doesn't come into income. Okay, it goes directly from IRA to charity. Now, if you still want to give another $100,000 away, you've got more AGI capacity because you haven't used it up.
I'll talk to you about
Sure,
that.
okay.
Is,
Yeah,
can you do that partially yearly from an IRA?
Yeah, it's up to 100,000, so,
Oh, okay.
so you can
So if you
do,
have 500 or something, and you're required to start taking money out, does that count?
it counts
against
toward,
that?
it counts towards your RMD, it does.
Oh.
So the one
Yes.
thing I'm going to clarify though, so we leave with the right, the charitable rollover, you cannot do it to a donor advised fund. The IRS has rules that it has to go some directly to a charity of some sort. So you could do it to something like a designated fund. So a donor advised fund wouldn't be the right tool for the IRA charitable rollover. It's just IRS rules. They want you to direct it to a charity of some sort directly. So
They view that you still have some kind of control if it
yes,
goes to a donor
exactly.
advised.
Exactly. So the one vehicle that we would offer that you could do that would be through a designated, because through here, you're naming a charity of your choice through it.
Or directly to a 501.
Exactly.
Yes.
You can outright do it to the 501c3. So I have a few people who are doing that through a designated. What it does is they're trying to split it among 5 or 6 charities. So it's a little bit easier to do it through here than having to have their broker wire
Because
6
that's-
different times.
That's the first IRS activity you need to satisfy, and then
Exactly.
And since we are a public charity, so that's your,
right.
right.
Exactly. So you get you worry about the one transfer, you get, whatever documentation, we give you a special document that says it was for a charity. What's that?
Minimum?
For the minimum of this is 10,000 as well.
To open
Yep.
it up, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So a designated fund would probably be most appropriate if you really don't have a family that wants to continue with
That-
donations.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly.
You don't have grandchildren, you don't have anyone
Right.
that would continue
Yeah.
managing your donor advised fund.
And one way to kind of, that works both ways, is we have a lot of donors who will open up a donor advised fund so they can be active and participate during their life. And then upon their death, they'll have the residual flow into a designated fund. So it will then kind of support the charities that they want to support in perpetuity. So if you want to be active and involved during your life, donor advised fund, and then if you don't have family but you still want to support the charities, you can set it up so it flows into a named fund, a designated fund.
So in theory, you could do both, really, and
Yeah.
use a designated fund as the IRS
Right.
avoidance for
Yeah.
your IRA, but if you wanted to do additional amount, you could put it in.
Exactly.
Correct.
That I have a
And
few
then
people who
have
do
that
that.
one roll into the other. if you
Correct.
Wanted to at your death.
Exactly. That's exact. Gosh, yes, you have the whole mechanics of all of it set up exactly. So yeah.
And we're here, we can answer
Yes.
questions. I know we're probably bumping up
Sorry.
against the.
No, those are great
I know
questions.
that
No, I
your folks need to
appreciate the
get back to the-
questions.
Sorry
Actually.
for the major interruption.
No, that's
No.
great. No, these are great questions. And actually, I'm leaving it now. We're done. The very last thing I was going to say, if you do get formal, great opportunity to create a mission statement. We love to work with families to put the whole thing together. So, and some nice examples in there. And that's it. Yeah, no, thank you. If
And
there's any other questions.
We're gonna hang out,
Yeah.
but if someone leaves and drives off and they think of something, our cards are in the packets. If you wanna email us or call us, we'd be happy to talk to you about it.
Right.
So, thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.